John, in the last segment, we were talking about sort of major seismic cultural shifts across the world. I want to get a little bit more granular and talk about cultural shifts happening inside the evangelical church, particularly in the United States. So there was a big book that came out recently kind of talking about a leftward drift in evangelicalism. Do you think there is a ideological leftward drift within American evangelicalism?
Well, I don't know if that's the case or not. Maybe. I pay attention to these things, and I think all of us have a story. All of us have a set of anecdotes that suggest yes or no on this. I think for most of us, it would suggest yes. Like, yeah, there's been a leftward drift. I mean, if I'm just looking at my own anecdotes, I would say absolutely there's been a leftward drift.
Yeah, same.
And but I want to dig behind that a little bit more. But let me give you a couple of the anecdotes. Now that my wife has a growing and successful podcast called Strong Women, between the two of us, we get so many books every week mailed to us by people. And we love books. We are keeping Goodwill stocked up down the street just by having to kind of, funnel things through the best we can. But my anecdote is that in most of the major Christian publishers, first of all, have been bought by secular publishing houses.
Mm-hmm.
I heard from an exec at another Christian publishing house this week, earlier this week, who was not bought by one of those, that has affected things. Now, that's his take on it. I don't have the visibility inside. He described a little bit about what the process looks like inside. I don't have the visibility. Here's what I know, that when it comes to these publishing houses publishing books by authors dealing with this connection between Christians and culture, or Christians and political stances, I'll get anywhere between 10 pushing a perspective that leans left or goes strong left for every one that goes right.
And so let me just point out, that's being sent to you. So imagine a person who is actually progressive and what I mean.
That's right. I maybe 10-1 is strong. I mean, look, I've gotten 3 in the last couple years dealing with something like the Second Amendment. Now, there's stuff about the First Amendment as well. There's other analyses that are way more kind of in the neutral, trying to make sense of it. And some of those are actually really helpful, and they're above the political fray, trying to do different things. But I'm talking about the ones that jump right into the political fray. And when they say these books, and again, I'm talking at least maybe 10-1 was strong, maybe 5-1 is more accurate. The ones that really get into an issue that you could consider to be in the political fray, a big cultural issue that has big political ramifications, I'm not getting any that are pushing Christians right. I'm getting the ones that are pushing Christians left, and they're sending it to me. They clearly have to know, right? I've gotten 3 on the Second Amendment. So gun rights, and 3 in the last, couple years that suggest that for Christians to love their neighbor means we should push extended gun control and reject this idea of the Second Amendment in one form. It needs to be reframed, reunderstood, and Christians should be behind that as a way of loving their neighbors. Very similar to the argument, well, look, you may not like this, but you should, mask up. You should take the vaccine. You should, this is a way of loving the neighbor. You do it for others. Now, listen, no question that Christian ethics is focused on others. First of all, God, and then others. So the fact that, somebody wants to make that argument about the Second Amendment, particularly in a nation that has so much gun violence, and so on. My point is I haven't gotten a single book saying that really the problem with gun violence, for example, in inner cities, is a problem of X, Y, and Z that's more fundamental. And to love your neighbors, you may need to be prepared, for example, to protect them in some sort of situation. And therefore, and even more than that, I can't even imagine. I would be so shocked to get a book from these same publishers that somehow made the argument loving your neighbor means being pro Second Amendment. It's just not even in the ballpark. I just would never get that. I'll give you another anecdote. So in other words, 5-1, and this isn't a scientific survey, but 5-1, the books that I'm getting from major Christian evangelical publishing houses that deal with issues having to do in the political fray are pushing left 5-1 for every pushing right, which I look at that and say, it's just so interesting when you hear the critique always being the political right. Evangelicals have been captivated by the political right. That's not the push that I'm feeling. Another example, universities, Christian colleges and universities. Anecdotally, again, Christian school, high school principal, not would anyway be considered, politically astute or really pushing, kind of leaning politically right. I think would pretty much sit pretty solidly in the evangelical mainstream. Probably would be personally pro-life, not really sure what that looks like publicly. I'm just telling you who this person is. Told me that as a high school principal at a Christian school, they're not able to hire graduates from a well-known prominent Christian university. And I said, why? And it had anything to do with the fact that, because they're too Trumpy or they're too trapped in the culture wars. It was specifically referred to CRT and LGBTQ issues, that on those two issues, they are unorthodox out of this school. You go to Evangelicals for Harris, that group. I mentioned this on the World and Everything in It podcast. Now, there's been an Evangelicals for Biden. There's been an Evangelicals for Obama. There's been all of those. I looked at this list, and I haven't done the direct comparison, so maybe I'm wrong on this. I probably should go back before I say this. I knew some of the folks who jumped on the Evangelicals for Biden. I disagreed with it. I don't understand how you could do it. I had conversations with folks who led this group. Mostly it wasn't an Evangelicals for Biden group. If you looked at it, it was an Evangelicals against Trump. That was really what it should have been called. But you could at least say on their theological beliefs, they were evangelical. They at least had a high view of Scripture, maybe not inerrancy, but a high view of Scripture. They, whatever, believed in, Jesus actually rising from the dead, and relatively orthodox view of things like sexuality and so on. You look at the Evangelicals for Harris list, there's people on that list that are just neo-pagan. They're not even evangelicals by the new kind of constantly moving target of what an evangelical actually is.
Right.
I mean, certainly not David Bebbington's definition. They're nowhere near. If that's the bullseye, they're throwing the dart in the opposite direction. They're throwing the dart in the direction that Jesus was sinful and probably homophobic. I mean, it's just not even close. And so you look at this and you say, well, but on that same list are people who would have been a part of that Evangelicals for Biden list. And you're like, you're calling someone else an evangelical who is, it's just not even, I mean, when J. Gresham Machen talked about liberal Christianity being a different religion, we're now talking about a different God. We're talking about a different view of sin, salvation, resurrection, Holy Scripture, everything. We're not even in the ballpark anymore and calling that evangelicals. That's my third anecdote.